The small town of Willowbrook was a place where time seemed to move slower. Nestled between rolling green hills and dense forests, it was a haven of tranquility. The air was always fresh, carrying the scent of pine trees and wildflowers. Birds chirped melodiously, and the occasional sound of a distant stream added to the symphony of nature. It was in this idyllic setting that Max, a majestic German shepherd, lived with his beloved family. Max was no ordinary dog. His coat was a rich blend of black and tan, shimmering like polished mahogany under the sunlight. His eyes, a deep shade of brown, were filled with intelligence and warmth. He was strong, agile, and fiercely loyal, a true guardian of his family. The Johnsons, his family, had adopted him as a puppy, and over the years, he had become an inseparable part of their lives. The Johnsons were a family of four: Mr. Johnson, a kind-hearted man with a love for gardening; Mrs. Johnson, a warm and nurturing woman who always had a smile on her face; and their two children, Emily and Jake, who were Max's best friends. Emily, the older of the two, was a spirited girl with a passion for painting, while Jake, the younger one, was an adventurous boy who loved exploring the woods with Max by his side. Life in Willowbrook was simple but fulfilling. Every morning, Max would wake up early, stretching his muscular frame before trotting to the kitchen, where Mrs. Johnson would greet him with a hearty breakfast. Afterward, he would accompany Mr. Johnson to the garden, where they would spend hours tending to the flowers and vegetables. In the afternoons, Max would play fetch with Emily and Jake in the backyard, his tail wagging furiously as he chased after the ball. Evenings were reserved for family time, where they would all gather around the fireplace, sharing stories and laughter. But one fateful autumn morning, everything changed. The air was crisp, and the golden leaves of the trees rustled in the gentle breeze. Max sensed something unusual as soon as he woke up. The house was abuzz with activity. Boxes were being packed, furniture was being moved, and the atmosphere was tense. Max watched curiously, his ears perked up and his tail wagging slowly. He didn't understand what was happening, but he trusted his family completely. "Good boy, Max," Mrs. Johnson said, kneeling down to stroke his head. Her voice was soft, but Max could detect a hint of sadness in it. He nuzzled her hand, trying to comfort her. "We'll be back soon, buddy," Mr. Johnson added, his voice cracking slightly. He patted Max's back, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Emily and Jake hugged Max tightly, their small arms wrapped around his neck. "We'll miss you, Max," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Jake buried his face in Max's fur, unable to say anything. Max wagged his tail, trying to reassure them. He didn't understand why they were so sad, but he knew he would wait for them, no matter how long it took. The moving van arrived, and the Johnsons began loading their belongings. Max watched from the porch, his heart growing heavier with each passing moment. When the van was fully packed, the family gathered around Max one last time. "Take care of him, please," Mrs. Johnson said to their neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, who had agreed to look after Max. "Of course," Mrs. Thompson replied, her voice gentle. "He'll be safe with me." With one final hug and a tearful goodbye, the Johnsons got into their car and drove away. Max stood at the gate, his eyes fixed on the disappearing vehicle. He didn't chase after them, instead, he sat down, his gaze never leaving the road. Days turned into weeks, and Max waited patiently. Every morning, he would return to the gate, sitting in the same spot, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of his family. Mrs. Thompson tried to bring him inside, but Max refused to leave. He would eat the food she brought him and drink the water, but he always returned to his post. The seasons changed, and the years passed, but Max's loyalty never wavered. He became a familiar sight in Willowbrook, a symbol of unwavering love and devotion. The townsfolk admired him, often stopping by to offer him food or a kind word. But no one could convince Max to abandon his vigil. He was determined to wait for his family, no matter how long it took. Little did Max know, his patience and loyalty would one day be rewarded in the most miraculous way. The days following the Johnsons' departure were strange and unsettling for Max. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt empty and silent. The familiar sense of his family, Mr. Johnson's earthy aroma from the garden, Mrs. Johnson's floral perfume, and the sweet, playful smells of Emily and Jake were slowly fading, replaced by the sterile air of an abandoned home. Max spent his first few nights on the porch, curled up on the old, weathered mat that still carried faint traces of his family's scent. The nights were colder now, the autumn winds carrying a biting chill that made him shiver. But Max didn't mind. He was determined to stay close to the gate, the last place he had seen his family. Mrs. Thompson, the kind neighbor who had promised to look after Max, visited him every day. She brought him bowls of fresh water and hearty meals, often sitting with him for a while to keep him company. "Oh, Max," she would say, her voice soft and soothing. "They'll be back, don't you worry." Max would look at her with his deep brown eyes, his tail giving a faint wag. He appreciated her kindness, but his heart ached for his family. He didn't understand why they had left, but he trusted them completely. They had promised to return, and Max believed them. As the weeks turned into months, Max's routine became a testament to his loyalty. Every morning, he would wake up at dawn, stretch his muscular frame, and trot to the gate. He would sit there for hours, his eyes fixed on the road, his ears perked up at the slightest sound. The townsfolk of Willowbrook began to notice him, and soon, Max became a familiar sight. Children on their way to school would stop to pet him, their small hands gently stroking his fur. "Good boy, Max," they would say, their voices filled with admiration. Max would wag his tail, grateful for the affection, but his gaze never strayed from the road. Adults, too, were moved by Max's devotion. Some would bring him treats, a juicy bone, a piece of meat, or even a warm blanket for the colder nights. They would sit with him for a while, sharing stories of their own pets and their own experiences with loss and hope. "You're a special dog, Max," one elderly man said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Your family is lucky to have you." Max would listen quietly, his eyes never leaving the horizon. He didn't understand all the words, but he could sense the kindness and compassion in their voices. It comforted him, but it didn't fill the void left by his family's absence. The seasons changed, and with them, the landscape of Willowbrook transformed. Autumn gave way to winter, and the once golden leaves were replaced by a blanket of snow. The cold was harsh, biting into Max's fur and making his joints ache. But he refused to leave his post. Mrs. Thompson tried to coax him inside her home, offering him a warm bed by the fireplace. "Come on, Max," she would say, her voice pleading. "You'll freeze out here." But Max would only look at her, his eyes filled with determination. He appreciated her concern, but he couldn't abandon his vigil. His family had left from this spot, and he was certain they would return the same way. The winter nights were long and lonely. The howling winds and the eerie silence of the snow-covered town made the world feel even more desolate. But Max found solace in the memories of his family. He would close his eyes and recall the sound of Emily's laughter, the feel of Jake's small hands hugging him, the warmth of Mrs. Johnson's touch, and the strength of Mr. Johnson's presence. One particularly cold night, a snowstorm swept through Willowbrook. The wind howled like a wounded animal, and the snow fell in thick, relentless sheets. Max huddled under the porch, his body trembling from the cold. His fur was coated with snow, and his breath came out in visible puffs. Mrs. Thompson braved the storm to check on him, her heart breaking at the sight of the loyal dog shivering in the cold. "Oh, Max," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You stubborn, brave boy." She brought him a thick blanket and a bowl of warm broth, staying with him until the storm subsided. Max ate the broth gratefully, his tail wagging faintly. He knew she cared for him, but his heart remained steadfast. When spring arrived, the snow melted, and the town came alive with the sounds of birds and the scent of blooming flowers. Max's spirits lifted slightly as the warmth returned. He would often wander around the yard, sniffing at the fresh grass and the colorful flowers that Mr. Johnson had planted. But his routine never changed. Every morning, he would return to the gate, sitting in the same spot, his eyes scanning the horizon. The townsfolk continued to visit him, their admiration for his loyalty growing with each passing day. "He's been waiting for months," one woman said to her friend as they watched Max from a distance. "I've never seen anything like it." "It's heartbreaking," her friend replied, her voice filled with emotion. "But also beautiful. Such devotion is rare." Max's story began to spread beyond Willowbrook. People from neighboring towns would visit just to see the loyal German shepherd who refused to give up on his family. Some brought him gifts, toys, treats, and even handmade blankets. Others simply sat with him, offering silent companionship. But despite the attention and the kindness, Max's heart remained heavy. He missed his family terribly, and the pain of their absence was a constant ache in his chest. He would often dream of them, visions of Emily's bright smile, Jake's playful laughter, Mrs. Johnson's gentle touch, and Mr. Johnson's reassuring presence. One day, a young boy named Tommy, who had recently moved to Willowbrook, approached Max with a curious expression. "Why do you wait here, Max?" he asked, his voice innocent and sincere. Max looked at the boy, his eyes filled with a depth of emotion that words could never capture. Tommy sat down beside him, gently stroking his fur. "I think I understand," Tommy said after a while. "You love them, don't you, and you believe they'll come back." Max's tail wagged faintly, and he nuzzled Tommy's hand. The boy smiled, his heart swelling with admiration for the loyal dog. As the months turned into years, Max's once shiny coat began to show streaks of gray, and his movements became slower. But his spirit remained unbroken. He continued his daily ritual of waiting by the gate, his eyes never losing their hopeful gleam. The townsfolk of Willowbrook often whispered about Max, their voices filled with a mix of sadness and admiration. "He's been waiting for years," they would say. "Such loyalty is rare." But Max didn't care about the passage of time. To him, every day was a new opportunity for his family to return. And he would wait for them, no matter how long it took. Time has a way of moving forward, indifferent to the hopes and fears of those who live within its grasp. For Max, the German shepherd who waited by the gate, the years rolled by like the changing seasons, each one marked by the same unwavering routine, the same unyielding hope. The once vibrant and energetic Max was now a mature dog, his coat streaked with gray and his movements slower, more deliberate. Yet, his spirit remained as strong as ever. Every morning, without fail, he would wake up at dawn, stretch his aging body, and make his way to the gate. It had become his sacred ritual, a testament to his loyalty and love. The townsfolk of Willowbrook had grown accustomed to seeing Max at his post. To them, he was no longer just a dog, he was a symbol of devotion, a living reminder of the power of love and loyalty. People from neighboring towns would often visit just to catch a glimpse of the legendary German Shepherd who had been waiting for his family for years. "There he is," a young woman whispered to her friend as they approached the old Johnson house. "The loyal dog who never gives up." Her friend nodded, her eyes filled with admiration. "It's incredible, isn't it, to wait for so long, without ever losing hope." Max, sitting by the gate, turned his head slightly to look at the newcomers. His deep brown eyes, though clouded with age, still held a spark of hope. He wagged his tail faintly, acknowledging their presence, but his gaze quickly returned to the road. The townsfolk had taken it upon themselves to care for Max. They brought him food, water, and blankets, ensuring that he was comfortable despite his stubborn refusal to leave his post. Mrs. Thompson, the kind neighbor who had first taken him in, continued to visit him every day, her heart breaking a little more each time she saw the longing in his eyes. "Oh, Max," she would say, her voice soft and filled with emotion. "You're such a good boy. They'll come back, I know they will." Max would look at her, his tail wagging faintly. He appreciated her kindness, but his heart ached for his family. He missed the sound of Emily's laughter, the feel of Jake's small hands hugging him, the warmth of Mrs. Johnson's touch, and the strength of Mr. Johnson's presence. The changing seasons brought with them a cycle of beauty and hardship. Spring was a time of renewal, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the sound of birdsong. Max would often wander around the yard, sniffing at the fresh grass and the colorful flowers that Mr. Johnson had planted so many years ago. Summer was a time of warmth and abundance. The sun shone brightly, casting a golden glow over the town. Children would often stop by to play with Max, their laughter filling the air. They would throw sticks for him to fetch, and Max, though slower now, would still chase after them with a youthful enthusiasm. Autumn was a time of reflection. The leaves turned golden and red, falling gently to the ground. Max would often sit by the gate, watching the leaves dance in the wind, his mind filled with memories of his family. He would close his eyes and recall the sound of Emily's laughter, the feel of Jake's small hands hugging him, the warmth of Mrs. Johnson's touch, and the strength of Mr. Johnson's presence. Winter was a time of hardship. The cold was harsh, biting into Max's fur and making his joints ache. The snow covered the ground in a thick, white blanket, and the nights were long and lonely. But Max refused to leave his post. He would huddle under the porch, his body trembling from the cold, but his eyes never leaving the road. The townsfolk did their best to keep Max comfortable during the winter months. They brought him warm blankets and bowls of hot broth, ensuring that he had everything he needed to survive the harsh weather. Mrs. Thompson even built a small shelter for him, complete with a soft bed and a heater. "You stubborn old dog," she would say, her voice filled with affection. "Why won't you come inside where it's warm?" Max would look at her, his eyes filled with determination. He appreciated her concern, but he couldn't abandon his vigil. His family had left from this spot, and he was certain they would return the same way. As the years passed, Max's story continued to spread. People from all over the country came to see the loyal German Shepherd who had been waiting for his family for so long. Some brought him gifts, toys, treats, and even handmade blankets. Others simply sat with him, offering silent companionship. One day, a journalist from a national newspaper visited Willowbrook to write a story about Max. She spent several days observing him, talking to the townsfolk, and learning about his incredible journey. "It's amazing," she said to Mrs. Thompson. "To wait for so long, without ever losing hope. It's a story that needs to be told." Mrs. Thompson nodded, her eyes filled with pride. "Max is a special dog. He has touched so many lives with his loyalty and love." The journalist's article was published a few weeks later, and it quickly went viral. People from all over the world were moved by Max's story, and donations began pouring in to help care for him. The townsfolk used the money to build a small memorial at the gate, complete with a plaque that read, "In honor of Max, the loyal German Shepherd who never gave up on his family." A symbol of love, loyalty, and hope. Max, though unaware of the fame he had garnered, continued his daily routine. Every morning, he would wake up at dawn, stretch his aging body, and make his way to the gate. He would sit there for hours, his eyes fixed on the road, his ears perked up at the slightest sound. The townsfolk, though saddened by Max's unwavering wait, were also inspired by his devotion. They often gathered at the gate to share stories of their own pets and their own experiences with loss and hope. "Max reminds us that love is worth waiting for," one elderly man said, his voice trembling with emotion. "No matter how long it takes." Max's story became a legend, a tale of loyalty and love that would be passed down through generations. The townsfolk of Willowbrook often whispered about him, their voices filled with a mix of sadness and admiration. "He has been waiting for years," they would say. "Such loyalty is rare." But Max didn't care about the passage of time. To him, every day was a new opportunity for his family to return. And he would wait for them, no matter how long it took. The years had been long, and the seasons had come and gone like chapters in a never-ending story. Max, the loyal German Shepherd, had grown older, his once shiny coat now streaked with gray, his movements slower and more deliberate. Yet, his spirit remained unbroken. Every morning, he would wake up at dawn, stretch his aging body, and make his way to the gate. It had become his sacred ritual, a testament to his loyalty and love. The townsfolk of Willowbrook had grown accustomed to seeing Max at his post. To them, he was no longer just a dog, he was a symbol of devotion, a living reminder of the power of love and loyalty. People from neighboring towns would often visit just to catch a glimpse of the legendary German Shepherd who had been waiting for his family for years. But on one particular morning, something extraordinary happened. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and the promise of a new day. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a golden glow over the town. Max, as usual, was sitting by the gate, his eyes fixed on the road, his ears perked up at the slightest sound. The townsfolk were still asleep, and the world was quiet, save for the occasional chirping of birds. Max's heart was heavy, as it often was these days. He missed his family terribly, and the pain of their absence was a constant ache in his chest. But he refused to give up hope. He believed, with every fiber of his being, that they would return. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Max's ears twitched at the sound of a distant engine. It was faint at first, barely audible over the rustling of the leaves. But as the sound grew louder, Max's heart began to race. He stood up, his tail wagging furiously, his eyes fixed on the horizon. A car appeared in the distance, its headlights cutting through the morning mist. Max's breath caught in his throat as the car drew closer. It was a familiar sight, a blue sedan, just like the one his family had driven away in all those years ago. The car slowed down as it approached the old Johnson house, and Max's heart pounded in his chest. He could barely contain his excitement as the car came to a stop in front of the gate. The engine turned off, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Then, the car doors opened, and Max's family stepped out. Emily, now a young woman, was the first to emerge. Her eyes widened in shock and disbelief as she saw Max standing there, his tail wagging furiously. "Max," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Jake, now a teenager, followed close behind. His eyes filled with tears as he recognized the loyal dog who had been waiting for them all these years. "Max!" he cried, his voice breaking. Mrs. Johnson stepped out next, her hand covering her mouth as she gasped in surprise. "Oh, Max," she said, her voice filled with love and regret. Mr. Johnson was the last to emerge, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Buddy," he said, his voice cracking. "We're home." Max bounded toward them, his heart bursting with joy. He barked and nuzzled them, his tail wagging so hard it seemed like it might fall off. Emily and Jake dropped to their knees, wrapping their arms around him, their tears mixing with his fur. "We missed you so much, Max," Emily said, her voice choked with emotion. "We're so sorry we left you," Jake added, his voice trembling. Mrs. Johnson knelt down beside them, her hands gently stroking Max's fur. "We never stopped thinking about you," she said, her voice filled with love. Mr. Johnson joined them, his strong arms wrapping around the entire family. "We're never leaving you again, buddy," he said, his voice firm and reassuring. The townsfolk, who had begun to gather at the scene, watched in awe as the long-awaited reunion unfolded. Tears streamed down their faces as they witnessed the incredible bond between Max and his family. "It's a miracle," one woman whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "After all these years," another added, her voice trembling. Max, though overwhelmed with joy, couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The years of waiting, the cold nights, the lonely days, it had all been worth it. His family was finally home, and that was all that mattered. The Johnsons spent the rest of the day reconnecting with Max, showering him with love and affection. They shared stories of their time away, explaining the unforeseen circumstances that had kept them from returning sooner. "We tried to come back, Max," Mrs. Johnson said, her voice filled with regret. "But life had other plans." "We never forgot about you," Mr. Johnson added, his voice firm. "You were always in our hearts." Max listened quietly, his tail wagging faintly. He didn't understand all the words, but he could sense the love and sincerity in their voices. It was enough for him. As the sun set over Willowbrook, the Johnsons and Max sat together on the porch, the bond between them stronger than ever. The townsfolk, though saddened by the years of separation, were also inspired by the incredible reunion. Max's story is a reminder that love is worth waiting for, one elderly man said, his voice filled with emotion. "No matter how long it takes," another added, her voice trembling. The morning sun bathed Willowbrook in a warm, golden light, casting long shadows across the quiet town. The air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers and the distant chirping of birds. But for Max and the Johnsons, the world seemed to stand still. The moment they had all been waiting for, the moment Max had waited years for, had finally arrived. Max's heart raced as he bounded toward his family, his tail wagging furiously. Emily and Jake dropped to their knees, wrapping their arms around him, their tears mixing with his fur. Mrs. Johnson knelt beside them, her hands gently stroking Max's head, while Mr. Johnson stood behind them, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We missed you so much, Max," Emily whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "We're so sorry we left you," Jake added, his voice trembling. Max barked softly, nuzzling them as if to say, "I missed you too." His deep brown eyes, though clouded with age, sparkled with joy. The years of waiting, the cold nights, the lonely days, it had all been worth it. His family was finally home. The townsfolk, who had begun to gather at the scene, watched in awe as the long-awaited reunion unfolded. Tears streamed down their faces as they witnessed the incredible bond between Max and his family. "It's a miracle," one woman whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "After all these years," another added, her voice trembling. The Johnsons spent the rest of the day reconnecting with Max, showering him with love and affection. They shared stories of their time away, explaining the unforeseen circumstances that had kept them from returning sooner. "We tried to come back, Max," Mrs. Johnson said, her voice filled with regret. "But life had other plans." "We never forgot about you," Mr. Johnson added, his voice firm. "You were always in our hearts." Max listened quietly, his tail wagging faintly. He didn't understand all the words, but he could sense the love and sincerity in their voices. It was enough for him. As the sun set over Willowbrook, the Johnsons and Max sat together on the porch, the bond between them stronger than ever. The townsfolk, though saddened by the years of separation, were also inspired by the incredible reunion. Max's story is a reminder that love is worth waiting for, one elderly man said, his voice filled with emotion. "No matter how long it takes," another added, her voice trembling. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Max and the Johnsons. They spent every moment together, making up for lost time. Emily and Jake took Max on long walks through the woods, just like they used to. Mrs. Johnson cooked his favorite meals, while Mr. Johnson spent hours gardening with Max by his side. But the reunion wasn't just a joyous occasion for the Johnsons, it was a moment of healing for the entire town. The story of Max's unwavering loyalty had touched the hearts of everyone in Willowbrook, and his reunion with his family brought a sense of closure and hope. One evening, as the Johnsons and Max sat together on the porch, Mrs. Johnson turned to her husband. "We should do something to honor Max," she said, her voice filled with love. "He waited for us all these years. He deserves to be remembered." Mr. Johnson nodded, his eyes glistening with tears. "You're right," he said. "Max is a hero. His story should be told for generations to come." The next day, the Johnsons approached the townsfolk with their idea. They wanted to build a memorial in honor of Max, a place where people could come to remember his incredible journey and the lessons it taught about love, loyalty, and hope. The townsfolk eagerly agreed, and soon, plans were underway. The memorial would be built at the gate where Max had waited for so many years. It would feature a statue of Max, along with a plaque that read, "In honor of Max, the loyal German shepherd who never gave up on his family." A symbol of love, loyalty, and hope. The project brought the entire town together. People from all walks of life contributed their time, money, and skills to make the memorial a reality. It was a labor of love, a testament to the impact Max's story had on everyone who heard it. As the days turned into weeks, Max's health began to improve. The love and care of his family had rejuvenated him, and though he was still an older dog, his spirit was as strong as ever. He spent his days basking in the warmth of his family's love, his heart full and content. One evening, as the Johnsons and Max sat together on the porch, Emily turned to her parents. "Do you think Max knows how much he means to us?" she asked, her voice filled with emotion. Mrs. Johnson smiled, her hand gently stroking Max's fur. "I think he does," she said. "Dogs have a way of understanding things we can't even put into words." Mr. Johnson nodded, his eyes glistening with tears. "Max has always been special," he said. "He's not just a dog, he's a part of our family." Max, though unaware of the depth of their conversation, wagged his tail faintly. He didn't need words to understand the love and gratitude in their voices. He had waited for his family for years, and now, they were finally home. The memorial was completed a few weeks later, and the entire town gathered for the unveiling. The statue of Max stood proudly at the gate, a symbol of his unwavering loyalty and love. The plaque beneath it bore the words that would forever remind everyone of his incredible journey. As the Johnsons stood before the memorial, their hearts swelled with pride and gratitude. They knew that Max's story would live on, inspiring countless others to believe in the power of love and loyalty. "Thank you, Max," Mrs. Johnson whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "For never giving up on us." Max barked softly, his tail wagging furiously. He didn't need words to express his love and devotion. His actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. The years that followed were filled with love, joy, and countless memories. Max spent his days surrounded by the family he had waited so long for, his heart full and content. Though he was an older dog, his spirit remained as strong as ever, a testament to the incredible bond between humans and their furry friends. And so, the story of Max, the loyal German Shepherd, became a legend, a tale of love, loyalty, and hope that would be passed down through generations. His memorial stood as a reminder that no matter how long the wait, love is always worth it. The years following Max's reunion with his family were filled with love, joy, and countless memories. Max, now an older dog, spent his days surrounded by the family he had waited so long for. His once streaked gray coat had turned almost entirely silver, and his movements were slower, but his spirit remained as strong as ever. The Johnsons made sure every moment with Max was special, cherishing the time they had together after so many years apart. Emily, now a young woman, often took Max on gentle walks through the woods, reminiscing about their childhood adventures. Jake, now a teenager, would sit with Max in the backyard, sharing stories of his day while Max listened intently, his tail wagging faintly. Mrs. Johnson continued to cook Max's favorite meals, and Mr. Johnson spent hours in the garden with Max by his side, just like old times. The memorial at the gate had become a beloved landmark in Willowbrook. People from all over the country visited to pay their respects to the loyal German Shepherd who had touched so many hearts. The statue of Max, standing proudly with his ears perked and his gaze fixed on the horizon, served as a reminder of the power of love, loyalty, and hope. The plaque beneath the statue bore the words, "In honor of Max, the loyal German Shepherd who never gave up on his family." A symbol of love, loyalty, and hope. The townsfolk often gathered at the memorial, sharing stories of Max and the lessons his journey had taught them. Children would sit by the statue, listening wide-eyed as their parents recounted the tale of the dog who waited for years. Max's story reminds us that love is worth waiting for, one mother told her children, her voice filled with emotion. "No matter how long it takes," her husband added, his voice trembling. Max's story had become a legend, a tale that transcended time and place. It was a story of unwavering loyalty, of hope in the face of adversity, and of the incredible bond between humans and their furry companions. As the years passed, Max's health began to decline. The Johnsons did everything they could to keep him comfortable, but they knew his time was drawing near. One evening, as the family sat together on the porch, Max rested his head on Mrs. Johnson's lap, his breathing slow and steady. "We've been so lucky to have you, Max," Mrs. Johnson whispered, her voice filled with love. "You've taught us so much," Emily added, her eyes glistening with tears. "We'll never forget you," Jake said, his voice trembling. Mr. Johnson placed a hand on Max's back, his heart heavy with emotion. "You're the best dog anyone could ever ask for," he said, his voice cracking. Max looked up at his family, his deep brown eyes filled with love and gratitude. He had waited for them for years, and now, as he neared the end of his journey, he knew he had done everything he could to show them how much he cared. That night, as the stars twinkled in the sky, Max passed away peacefully, surrounded by the family he had loved so dearly. The Johnsons held him close, their tears falling freely as they said their final goodbyes. The next morning, the town of Willowbrook gathered to honor Max's memory. The memorial at the gate was adorned with flowers, candles, and handwritten notes from people whose lives had been touched by his story. The Johnsons stood before the statue, their hearts heavy but filled with gratitude. "Max's legacy will live on," Mrs. Johnson said, her voice filled with emotion. "He taught us the true meaning of love and loyalty." "He was more than just a dog," Mr. Johnson added, his voice trembling. "He was a part of our family, and he'll always be in our hearts." The townsfolk nodded in agreement, their eyes glistening with tears. Max's story had become a part of Willowbrook's history, a tale that would be passed down through generations. In the years that followed, the memorial became a place of reflection and inspiration. People from all over the world visited to pay their respects to the loyal German Shepherd who had touched so many hearts. Children would sit by the statue, listening wide-eyed as their parents recounted the tale of the dog who waited for years. Max's story reminds us that love is worth waiting for, one mother told her children, her voice filled with emotion. "No matter how long it takes," her husband added, his voice trembling. Max's story had become a legend, a tale that transcended time and place. It was a story of unwavering loyalty, of hope in the face of adversity, and of the incredible bond between humans and their furry companions. Max's story is one of love, loyalty, and hope, a tale that will be remembered for generations to come. His journey reminds us that no matter how long the wait, love is always worth it. The memorial in Willowbrook stands as a testament to his incredible spirit, a symbol of the enduring bond between humans and their furry friends. As the sun sets over Willowbrook, casting a golden glow over the town, the statue of Max stands proudly at the gate, his gaze fixed on the horizon. It's a reminder that love, loyalty, and hope are the cornerstones of life, and that no matter how long the journey, the destination is always worth it. And so, the legend of Max, the loyal German Shepherd, lives on, a story that will continue to inspire and touch hearts for years to come.